American bases across the Middle East were supposed to be the safest places on Earth for U.S. troops. They were built, fortified, and defended as if nothing serious could ever reach them. But in one 90-minute window, that illusion was shattered. Because tonight, Iran didn't just harass those bases. It didn't just send drones buzzing around the perimeter or lob the usual rockets that air defenses were built to swat out of the sky. It unleashed one of the most defeat-resistant weapons in its arsenal, and fired it at 4 different American installations almost at the same time. Not a test shot, not a warning. A coordinated multi-base hit. Al Udeid in Qatar, Prince Sultan in Saudi Arabia, the U.S. naval facility in Bahrain, Ayn al Asad in western Iraq. 4 names that, until now, sounded like distant, secure hubs on a map. Suddenly, they became a live-fire demonstration of what happens when hypersonic technology meets a war that has already been grinding both sides down for weeks. And the weapon Iran chose for this moment wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was saved. And it was fired at exactly the point when American military power in the region was at its weakest. But to understand why that matters, you have to understand what actually hit those bases. For months, the pattern looked familiar. Iranian drones humming in from the distance, older ballistic missiles launched in volleys, extended-range rockets trying to push Patriot batteries and radar crews to their limits. It was dangerous, it caused damage, but it still fit inside the comfort zone of U.S. air defense doctrine. Systems like Patriot and CRAM were built for that world. Straight-line trajectories, predictable arcs, objects that, once tracked, could be plotted and then intercepted by a missile designed to meet them at a calculated point in space. It's still hard, it's still high pressure, but it's a problem the system was meant to solve. Then the Fatah II entered the picture. Think of the Fatah II as a missile that refuses to fly like a normal missile. It doesn't just race toward its target, it changes its mind on the way in. It boosts up to extremely high speeds, then sends a glide vehicle screaming downrange, twisting and shifting in its final seconds. That last moment move is where it becomes a nightmare for defenders. A standard interceptor bets everything on prediction. Where is the incoming object now, and where will it be when my missile gets there? That math only works if the target behaves, but a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle doesn't behave. It cheats. It's like trying to catch a fastball that suddenly turns into a curveball 3 centimeters before it hits your glove. This is why the Fatah II was more than just another missile in the inventory. It was a card Iran held back. While Shahed drones and older ballistic systems chewed away at radars and infrastructure, the Fatah II stayed in the shadows. It wasn't meant for harassment. It was meant for something bigger, striking high-value targets at the precise moment when defenses were already frayed. That decision to hold back this system tells you something. Iran wasn't just firing whatever it had on hand. It was waiting for the day when using its most defeat-resistant weapon would generate maximum impact for minimum risk. That day arrived when 4 major American installations were already operating under strain. And that's exactly when Iran pulled the trigger. Look at the target list and you can see the logic. This wasn't about random bases. This was about nodes. Al Udeid in Qatar isn't just another airfield. It's the forward nerve center of U.S. air operations in the region. Command rooms, coordination hubs, the place where flight paths, strike packages, and surveillance systems are stitched together into a coherent campaign. Even after previous damage in this conflict, it remained the central brain of the air war. Strike that with a hypersonic weapon that's harder to stop, and you're not just aiming at runways. You're aiming at command nodes, hardened bunkers, and the backbone of coordination itself. Prince Sultan in Saudi Arabia plays a different but equally crucial role. It's been hosting refueling and support aircraft, the flying gas stations and support platforms that make deep strike missions against Iran possible. When you see a bomber or a strike package hit targets far from its home field, there's usually a tanker in that story. Earlier in the conflict, some of that refueling capacity had already been taken out. Hitting Prince Sultan again now isn't about symbolism. It's about strangling what's left of that extended reach. Then there's the naval support activity in Bahrain. On paper, it's just another support facility. In reality, it's the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. From that relatively small patch of land, the U.S. coordinates its naval operations in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Damaging that facility with a more capable warhead is less about cratering buildings and more about disrupting the flow of decisions, orders, and information at sea. Finally, Ayn al Asad in western Iraq. This base has been a primary American hub in Iraq for years. It's a logistics node, a staging point, and a symbol of the U.S. footprint in that country. Including it in the same strike window as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain sends a clear signal. This isn't about punishing one country's leadership. This is about hitting the entire geographic spread of American presence in the region in a single move. 4 bases, 4 countries, 1 coordinated strike pattern. That level of synchronization doesn't happen by accident. For all 4 bases to be hit within such a tight window, the launch timing, trajectories, and firing permissions had to be worked out well in advance. This wasn't a sudden emotional reaction. It was a pre-planned operation, waiting for the exact moment when the impact would be greatest. And if the targeting choices show you how Iran thinks about U.S. power in the region, the casualty picture shows you how the United States thinks about the politics of absorbing a hit like this. Official statements always come first, and they always sound familiar. Acknowledgement of strikes. Confirmation that casualties are being assessed. That phrase is careful for a reason. It buys time. It calms nerves. It says just enough while saying almost nothing at all. You've heard it before after aircraft incidents and previous attacks. A transport plane goes down, and the first report calls it a crash while numbers are still under review. Only later do the real details emerge, names, units, and the true human cost that was there from the first minute. That pattern is important because it teaches you how to read the language. When casualties are low or zero, leadership tends to confirm that quickly. Low numbers reassure allies, voters, and the troops themselves. They're politically useful. But when that vague assessment wording lingers, it usually means something else. The number is higher, the implications are bigger, and nobody wants to lock it in publicly before the full wave of consequences is clear. Now connect that to what actually got hit. None of the 4 bases struck by Fatah 2 missiles are empty shells. Al Udeid holds thousands of personnel, from flight crews and intelligence analysts to support staff. Prince Sultan hosts key Air Force elements tied to refueling and strike operations. Bahrain houses the 5th Fleet's core staff. Ayn al Asad has been home to American troops for the entire length of this conflict. Combine those populations with a weapon explicitly designed to punch through or slip past intercept attempts, and the idea of minimal casualties starts to look optimistic at best. When a warhead defeats, or at least seriously complicates interception, it doesn't just fall into open desert. It hits where people actually work, sleep, and operate. And those impacts have to go somewhere. You can't see classified casualty lists, but you can sometimes see their shadows. Medical centers that typically handle routine care suddenly cancel non-urgent services. Blood donation campaigns spike at unusual times. Transport aircraft land in places that typically receive seriously wounded personnel from overseas conflicts. Those quiet signals often move faster than the official numbers. They don't tell you everything, but they hint at scale. They suggest when the toll on the ground doesn't match the mild tone of the initial press release, and when the gap between what's happening in the field and what's being said at the podium grows wide enough, it doesn't just become a military issue, it becomes a political crisis. Because now the White House has to answer a question it's been avoiding since this conflict began. At what point does an attack cross the line from manageable escalation into something that forces a fundamentally different response? That question leads straight into the trap Iran has been building. Up until now, Washington has tried to play a careful game. Every time Iran or its partners hit something tied to the United States, the answer has followed a familiar template: a limited retaliatory strike on launch sites, some strongly worded statements, and then a rapid attempt to put the fire back inside its box. The message was always the same: we'll hit back hard enough to show we're serious, but not so hard that we tip into a full-scale war. That framework worked as long as the attacks stayed in a certain range: limited, symbolic, or at least survivable, without forcing a new strategy. But 4 near-simultaneous hypersonic hits on major American bases, that's a different category. Now the U.S. leadership faces a menu of options, and none of them are cheap. Stick with the standard. Hit launch sites, radar stations, and a few key facilities in Iran, then call it a day. That keeps the pattern intact, but it sends a dangerous message. It tells Tehran that even a carefully timed multi-base hypersonic strike with serious casualties doesn't cross any new red line. It says, in effect, we will absorb this and still respond within the same box you've already mapped out. That kind of predictability is a gift to anyone designing an attrition campaign. Escalate harder, go beyond launch sites. Target a wider slice of Iranian military infrastructure. Go after more command centers, more strategic assets, maybe even some of the mobile launchers that are notoriously hard to kill. That response hits harder, but it also risks triggering the very spiral into broader war that the U.S. has tried to avoid from day one. Then there's the most extreme option. Stop hitting just the shooters and start targeting the factory. That means a sustained campaign against missile production lines, storage depots, and the entire ecosystem that keeps weapons like the Fatah 2 rolling off the assembly line. In theory, that's the path that changes the long-term balance. In practice, it demands resources, basing, refueling, and command infrastructure that have already been weakened by this exact Iranian campaign. So the U.S. is left staring at 3 doors. One that looks weak, one that looks risky, and one that may not even be fully open with the capacity it has left in theater. And that's exactly how Iran wanted it. Because when you zoom out, this morning's barrage doesn't look like a sudden lunge. It looks like a finishing move. From the opening days of the conflict, Iran's strategy hasn't been about winning a single decisive battle. It's been about wearing down American capabilities piece by piece. Hit radar here. destroy refueling aircraft there, damage command centers just enough to make every subsequent operation harder, slower, and more fragile. On the surface, each strike looked like another flare-up in a long list of confrontations. But together, they formed a pattern. Slowly erode the tools the U.S. needs to project power in the region until it's forced to fight with less flexibility, fewer options, and more political risk attached to every decision. Once that erosion reached a certain threshold, fewer tankers, degraded bases, overworked air defenses, that's when the Fatah II came off the shelf. Firing it at 4 bases at once isn't just an act of aggression, it's a stress test. It hits the air campaign's brain in Qatar, its refueling veins in Saudi Arabia, its naval coordination in Bahrain, and its main presence in Iraq, all in a single move. It forces Washington to make a choice inside a decision space that has already been shaped and narrowed by months of prior attacks. And here's the key. Iran probably isn't guessing about U.S. weakness. It's been watching it develop. Every fighter that had to divert because a tanker wasn't available on time, every radar that went dark after a previous strike, every patch of runway under repair, every rushed rotation of personnel trying to keep an overworked system running. All of those details form a picture, and that picture tells Iran when the U.S. is least ready for something like a hypersonic volley. So when the Fatah IIs lifted off and arced toward those 4 bases, it was likely because Tehran believed this was the point where their impact would be maximized. Fewer interceptors available, more critical nodes already damaged, and a U.S. political leadership running out of painless options. In other words, this wasn't just about hitting American bases. It was about triggering a decision environment where every move Washington makes from here on out carries a cost that Iran has already factored into its own plans. That leaves one uncomfortable question hanging over everything that happens next. At what point does a conflict like this stop being about individual strikes and start being about who successfully shapes the other side's choices? If one player can grind down the other's capacity, time its major blows to moments of maximum vulnerability, and force its opponent into a set of options that all look like some version of a loss, when does that become its version of victory? Right now, U.S. leaders are sitting with that problem. Any response they choose, to stay inside the old escalation pattern, to risk breaking out of it, or to attempt a much larger campaign with weakened assets, will tell Iran something about how well its long game has worked. And the most unsettling part is this. Every one of those responses is a scenario Iran has probably already wargamed. So as hypersonic debris cools on 4 different American bases and casualty assessments quietly move from field reports to political talking points, the real story may not be the number of missiles launched or the number of buildings damaged. It may be the fact that, for the first time in this war, the side firing those missiles might be the one setting the terms of what happens next. If this coordinated strike really was timed to the exact moment U.S. capacity in the region dipped to its lowest point, what does that say about how closely Iran has been tracking the slow bleed of American power? And if every possible U.S. response has been made costly in advance, how do you even define winning from here? Let me know what you think. Did Iran just cross a line, or did it carefully build this moment from the very first shot of this conflict?